Alright, continuing on in the next session here of our tutorial. I'm going to take a look now at the time and travel sheet that documents the time worked for several different employees or personnel. Basically, this is a time sheet that we're looking at here, although it does include the travel. Now, additionally, there is another documentation sheet that specifically focuses on the travel here. You can see it described here for quarter one, TRVL Q1. And I'm still editing that a bit, and we'll address that in a future tutorial. The timesheet Q1, quarter one in this case, and you can see quarter two over here, focused on the time, but then it does include the mileage as well. I don't know that that's really necessary, but I'm just basically taking the timesheet format as they've come to me from my colleagues and duplicating that and tying it into this workbook. So for our purposes here, I'm going to take and adjust my view over to page layout to make that just a little bit simpler. So you can see these are organized by pages. Basically, starting at the beginning, you have your time and travel sheet or timesheet for your first person. And their title for this person, the title within your organization, is going to automatically fill in here. As you can see, is described up here in the field. This is drawing from a particular field in your cumulative budget spreadsheet. So we'll go back over and check that. So you would have filled that in when you first started the contract. Here, you fill in their title right here. In our case, currently it's Rhonda Gordon. And you fill in the title for that first person, perhaps it's your program manager, in your personnel on the contract. And so whatever title you put in there, it's going to automatically populate here. It's also going to automatically populate their name right here based on what you entered in on the cumulative spreadsheet. The time frame is going to fill in, the contract name is going to fill in, all from the cumulative spreadsheet. You can see that once again they're in green, so automatically populate. Contract mileage rate, that's going to auto-populate from your travel spreadsheet when you type that in right here. That automatically populates. See, that's red. So when you populate that in, whatever the mileage rate you're being reimbursed for that particular contract based on the federal reimbursement rate at the time of the contract initiation, then that's generally what your mileage rate will be. But then here you do need to fill in the amount per hour for that particular position. Currently, for this position, one contract we have, that amount is $22.55 for our program manager, typically, or kind of the lead person, if you will, on a given project. So then you would simply fill in there the date here. I've just put in some example dates here. And then if any description is needed, this would primarily be if the person went out to a meeting or event and went somewhere and there was mileage involved. Then you would put that here. It automatically fills in the grant contract. You can see in my example here in the description, Flint Soil and Water, that was like a Soil and Water Conservation District meeting, for example, that perhaps our director attended. And then you would type in the mileage. Again, that's red here. These are just random mileages typed in this example. You will get your blank template would look like that. It wouldn't have any numbers in it. So, but I'll keep those there for the moment for our example purposes. You put in the mileage, the rate's going to automatically populate for you based on this up here, and that's automatically populating again from whatever we entered for our travel spreadsheet, travel documentation sheet. Time in and time out, when you put those in, it'll automatically populate the total number of hours worked. You will probably see in your blank timesheet I have left the first two numbers. So I was going to try and delete all these out of here just so you could see. Well, anyway, probably what you will see in your example is that it says from 9 to 9. 9, you can see this is 9 a.m. to 9 a.m. so that the hours show as 0. At least in the top line of whatever spreadsheet you receive when you start with a fresh one. So you just would need to type in, I'll just put 8 o'clock in here as an example, whatever time you wanted for your work on a given day or work for that person. And so if, let's say you put 8 to 4, then see it's automatically going to populate 8 hours. If you prefer, for whatever reason, to not put the time in and time out, of course, maybe a person might have a break for a while in the middle of the day or something that's not applicable to that project, then you could simply erase or leave blank your fields here for time in and type out, and then simply type in by hand. Let's say you had 4 hours for that project on that given day, January 4th in this case, as you can see the dates over here. Excuse me. Now, the time in and time out, if you are entering those, that isn't necessarily your actual time in and time out. That's the time in for that particular project. Let's say in my example here, that's the Ochlockonee River contract. Now, at the moment, our organization is just filing a contract on a single 319, and so for at least some of us in our office, all of our time is going being counted here towards that particular contract. And so in which case it would be just like this, where you're putting from 9 to 5. So that makes it fairly simple. Now, keeping in mind there may be other programs or projects outside of the 319 program in which you're putting some of your time. Just an example, in our office we also administer a household water well program, and so sometimes some of our time gets counted towards that invoice on our household water well program. And so again, you would want to just put in here time in and time out for the amount of time you were specifically wanting to count towards the Ochlockonee River invoice. Or again, if you prefer not to do the time in and time out and simply type in by hand and type over the formula that you see up here, type in the amount of time you worked, that's fine too. Whatever is most suitable to your preferences and purposes. I don't know that the EPD review folks review in detail exactly the time in and time out and need that, but that's just typically the way we've submitted our timesheets in our office. So, but let's just say whatever the time in a given day that you spent towards a particular contract, let's say the Ochlockonee River in this case, maybe it was 4 hours. Now it may not have been exactly from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m., but you could just, if you simply needed 4 hours to count toward the Ochlockonee River contract, then you would put in, let's say 9 to 1. You would just choose a 4-hour time frame on a given date, January 5th in this case, at the line I'm looking at here, and then that would populate. So I think you can get the idea of that based on my explanation. I'm not going to belabor that point too much further. But point is just to get whatever total hours your team in your office has deemed appropriate for how much time you're putting towards that particular contract. A common situation in our office is where I've divided my time by 2, or by, in some cases by 3 or even 4, depending on how many contracts we're managing at a time. And so, you know, if I worked 8 hours in a given day and we're dividing that by 4, well, then I would just have 2 hours for a given contract, such as the Ocklawaha River. Okay. Scrolling down to the bottom, the sheet is going to calculate the total number of hours, total number of mileage, and then the appropriate reimbursement amount there. Then it's taking our total hours, which you actually see here and you see over here, total hours, times your reimbursement rate for that particular personnel position for that particular contract, which again we entered that in up here at the top, contract rate per hour. So it's going to fill that in for you, and then equals, and then you have your total pay right here. Now, one sheet might be enough in most cases for one person. See the amount of days here. Let's see, it's from 5 down to about 43, I guess. And so you're looking at about 38 lines, so you'd have about 38 days in a given quarter to fill in on a single sheet. Typically, because you probably wouldn't be putting an individual person's entire time towards a single contract, that would be plenty of lines. However, if you were putting someone's entire time towards a single contract, you probably will need a second page, and so that's what is over here on the right side, is just a second page that continues the flow of that. And here at the bottom, the totals here are going to be totals for both this page, your first page, and your second page, and you can see that described. Total mileage, page 1 and 2, total hours 1 and 2. That's just the way that I set up the formulas here for it to total everything from both this page and the previous page in terms of the hours worked and the resulting pay, as well as the resulting miles driven and mileage reimbursement. When you're entering in the dates, you could simply do that by hand and type in the date here. You know, I'm talking about this on June 8th, 2018, so I could just enter that date in here. Or one thing you could do, depending on your situation, that might still require a little bit of editing, is you could put the first date of a given quarter that you worked. And so right now we're in quarter 2 for this year, 2018, so the first date for this quarter would presumably be April 1st. You can type it in there, and then if you grab this little box here in the corner and scroll down, it will automatically populate all those dates for you, and it will even figure out which months need 30 days in them and which months need 31. So it'll only put 30 days in April 2018. And I did check, and that it even put in only 28 days for February, although I don't think it takes into account leap years. But so you could do that, but of course you're going to have Saturday, Sunday dates in there, which hopefully most of the time you're not having to work on weekends, and so you would leave that. So if you do that, so this takes us down to May 8th, then you would likely need a second page, and so I would just pick up with May 9th But then if you do that and you come on down, so I have this fill in all my dates. If I do that, that brings me up to June 16th. So that's from April 1st to June 16th. That's not quite a 3-month period, so a little less than a whole quarter. I didn't take the time to create yet a third spreadsheet, so a person could have 3 whole quarters worth of dates on here. You could, of course, do that if you wanted and create a third page, perhaps even farther over here to the right, in the further columns off to the right, if you so chose, that then totaled all 3 pages. I just figured vast majority of time you're not going to be filling in every single day, and certainly not weekends. And so you will, in some cases, just have to enter the date in by hand. Now what I was doing with the dates there, and just typing in my first date. Let's just move on to the next quarter for example purposes. Let's say I put in July 1st, 2018. Let's just say on a particular contract you were working pretty heavily on that contract for the first month of that contract, but then not much after that. Well, then you would have enough space, for all of July here, all of a single month here on a single page, or maybe you did July and August, but not much in September for that contract. Well, then it would fit into 2 pages. But I'll leave it to you to work out the entries for the date that you're filling in. It's my hope or intent then to have this document within a given office, such as our office at Golden Triangle, to have this document shared, this whole entire workbook, on a shared space. We use a sharing portal called Dropbox where we share documents. And so if this workbook was shared, then each person could simply go in and enter their time in on a be it daily or perhaps weekly basis, where they just enter their time for each given contract throughout the quarter. And so then once you get to the end of the quarter, your time would be all filled in. So I've started endeavoring to do that with my time. Now, we've been looking here at a example timesheet for our executive director. If you continue scrolling down, then you'll find the next sheet for your next person. In our organization at present, that's Miss Julie Shutters, who in our organization has the title Project Manager. And so then basically all the same rules would apply. You're just needing to fill in the places that are in red, if there was any mileage, date, time in and out, or again, you could leave that blank and just put the hours if you so prefer, and the particular reimbursement rate for that person. I think generally in our contracts that rate is actually $15. I just had 22 thrown in there for example purposes. And it shows here page 1, and then if you need a second page as well, over here to the right it shows page 2. So yeah, again, this person, be it your project manager or implementation manager, whatever title they might have in your organization, could fill in this, and then the totals will all pick up here. And then continuing on, I have yet a third one. This applies to me at our organization, or the program assistant position. You can see it's filled in my name, it's filled in my title here, all from whatever I entered in over on the cumulative budget right here. Okay. Yeah. All right. And then it brings our totals. I just created 3 spreadsheets in my template for 3, I'm sorry, not 3 spreadsheets, but set this up for 3 individuals. You could, of course, duplicate this and carry it on down to 4th person if you had that many that you were billing for in your 319 contracts. Then, of course, you're going to be using this information to put into your invoice, depending on how many hours they worked or what their pay rate was. Now, for our organization, generally, all this amount that we're putting on our timesheet is going to go into match. That's just the way we do it. When it comes to federal charges on an invoice, I'm going to go over here and visit the invoice. Federal charges, that amount is based on how much is in the federal bucket for that category in that contract, and so then we typically have just said, okay, if we've got let's just say a total of $10,000 for a given contract for the whole life of the contract, we would just divide that by the number of quarters. You can see here in my example there's 12 quarters in this contract, and so we would just divide 10 by 12 divided by 12, and then that would give you the amount here, $833.34, to the amount that we would bill. And then that's just a flat rate that's not actually directly tied to the number of hours worked by that person. And that's just the way we've operated in our office. Other offices may do that differently. And so where the number of hours worked come in, that value comes in is in match, non-federal in-kind match contributions. And so the value of that would come in here. And so if we go back to our timesheet here, I'm going to go back, scroll up to the executive director person. So here, they worked in just the figures that I've put in here as an example, $13,350 in that quarter, and that would be unusually high. I just happen to have filled in a person working 9 to 5 every day, 7 days a week, for almost a full quarter there, 2.5 months roughly. So, but that figure, whatever figure you got here, 13,350, is then going to auto-populate in your invoice. Now, at the moment, I'm not quite sure why it's giving us just a 40-cent difference. I might have to work on my formula. Oh, I think it's because my column is a little short here. And here, looking at going back to the home ribbon bar, this amount right here is currently set to view in the currency format right here, and it makes it a little bit shorter. If I switch it to accounting, then it will probably show us the cents, or maybe if I just give it a little more room. Of course, that pushes me over off my page. If I widen the columns, and you might have to play with the columns a little bit in your case. I don't know if it's going to let me do that right now. So anyway, that 40 cents is there. Let's see if I change this to accounting. There we go. The actual amount there is $13,349.60. It's simply when we shorten this up. Of course, it gives us the pound symbols, which simply means, for anyone not thoroughly familiar with Excel, it means the number doesn't have enough room to appear in that, and you need to just widen your column a little bit, or if you don't have room to do that where it jumps it off the page, as you can see here, some other alternatives are to simply make your font smaller by coming up here. Right now it's font 11, so if I drop that down and say font 9, size 9, then it appears smaller and fits in there. You can adjust the kind of format that it is in. So the currency format takes up less space than the accounting format. But earlier, when just a few moments ago before I started adjusting this, you can see it was populating with 13,050, and that's simply because it was rounding it from the 13,349 and 60 cents. Anyway, back to the point I was making. This number right here is going to populate right here for you. And the same with your second person, which in this contract is called your project coordinator. And finally your admin person here. And then I just have a space for a fourth person here, but we don't have a fourth person that we are billing for in our contracts, and I think that would be somewhat unusual. So I haven't created all the formulas to tie into a fourth person. Again, just to clarify for anyone kind of new to 319s, here the title of this person is project coordinator, just because in my example template that might be their title within that 319 contract, or it might be implementation coordinator or implementation manager. But over here on the timesheet, that title is the title they have in your organization. And so within our organization, that person might have the title project manager, or I think, though I put in the word project manager here, Miss Julie Sutters actually has the title implementation manager. So I guess I would need to change that if we were to actually use this. Alright, I think that gives you a general glimpse of the timesheet. One or two final thoughts here. So this figure is going to, whatever you put in for a given person for their time, let's say in this case $3,968 worth, oh I'm sorry, that was for the mileage, but whatever for their total time worked, that's going to fill in over here on your invoice, but it's in blue, you can see here. And so that color I put in a few places throughout this whole workbook to indicate where you might have numbers that are going to auto-populate, but you should carefully double check and make sure that's what you actually want there. So, all right.